And welcome to our first event in a very busy spring for African American and African Diaspora Studies and the Institute for Research in African American Studies. And Farah reminded me it's the beginning of Black History Month. That shows you where I am. But my response is every month is Black History Month, right? So I'm Mabel Wilson. I'm faculty in AAAADS, and I'm the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies. And I want to begin by situating the university on the traditional land and unceded territory of the Lenape. And we pay respect to their diaspora and honor the past, present, and future rights of the Lenape on their rightful homeland. And so for the past 29 years, the Institute for Research in African American Studies, founded by the late Manning Marable, has been a fierce advocate of critical thought and social responsibility in Black studies. Dr. Marable offered this prescient reminder in a New York Times article from 1998, and it was an interesting conversation with Henry Louis Gates, who wrote a kind of response or a dialogue. Dr. Marable wrote, quote, "Black studies must utilize history and culture as tools by which an oppressed people can transform their lives and the entire society. Scholars have an obligation not just to interpret, but to act," quote. And we see what's going on in the world, both in higher education, but also the recent events in Memphis, that this is, I think, a very important, always dimension of Black studies. The Institute serves as an academic resource center for local and global communities that has cultivated an intellectual tradition grounded in Harlem and New York City's rich history and culture. And now, in partnership with our Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, we continue to expand the array of contemporary scholarship and interpretation of the Black diasporic experience, like this ongoing series, tonight's conversation. And so I want to welcome you tonight for a conversation about who hears here on Black music, past and present, by Dr. Guthrie Ramsey in conversation with Dr. Shana Redmond. I will begin by saying that Dr. Guthrie P. Ramsey, Jr. is an award-winning music historian, author, pianist, and composer. He's a widely published writer, and as a musician, has released 5 recordings, including A Spiritual Vibe. He recorded John Jackson and E. Patrick Johnson's documentary, Making Sweet Tea, and co-curated the National Museum of African American History and Culture's exhibition, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, How the Apollo Theater Shaped American Entertainment. The multi-talented Dr. Ramsey is the author of Race Music, Black Cultures from Bebop to Hip Hop, 2003, The Amazing Bud Powell, Black Genius, Jazz History, and the Challenge of Bebop, 2013. And what we will be discussing today and hearing more about who hears here on Black music, past and present from 2022. So tonight's conversation will focus on that recent publication, which is a reflection on the time and space of writing, especially as a faculty at the University of Pennsylvania's music department. Who Hears Here is also a meditation on listening and making music. And it also is really a reflection of Dr. Ramsey's project to bridge the discipline of musicology with the sonic spheres of Black popular culture. Now, joining Dr. Ramsey this evening is our colleague, Dr. Shana Redmond, who contributed the afterwords to Who Hears Here. Dr. Redmond is a professor of English and comparative literature and also a professor at the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race here at Columbia University. And most recently, or currently, she is the president of the American Studies Association. No small task, quite busy. Dr. Redmond's important works include Anthem, Social Movements, and the Sound of Solidarity in the African Diaspora of 2014, and Everything Man, the Form and Function of Paul Robeson from 2020, which received the 2021 American Book Award. She has written for numerous publications, including Black Music Research Journal, Race and Class, Brick, a literary journal, NPR, and BBC, as well as album liner notes, most recently for Wadada Leo Smith's String Quartets, numbers 1 through 12, released on Toom in 2022. And so we'll begin with the conversation with Dr. Ramsey and Dr. Redmond. All right.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this beautiful invitation to come to a campus I know well. And we thought we'd just start out with a little music. This is a music video I produced on my project, A Spiritual Vibe, Volume 1. And it's a spiritual, but it's updated with contemporary sounds, and it's based in my current residential place called Philadelphia, and we'd like you to check it out and get you warmed up a little bit.
City. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates. 12 gates. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a It's a beautiful city. Three gates in the east. Oh, three gates in the west. Hey, three gates in the north. Oh, three gates in the south. Hey, yeah, yeah, three gates in the east. Three gates in the west. Oh, three gates in the north. Three gates in the south. 12 gates. 12 gates. 12 gates. 12 gates. 12 gates and city. Ooh, 12 gates and city. Do you wanna go? Do you wanna go? 12 gates to the city. Yeah. Do you wanna go? Do you wanna go? 12 gates to the city. Yeah. 12 gates to the city. Do you wanna go? Do you wanna go to that city pagan? 12 gates to the city. Yeah. Hallelujah.
Okay, I only moved to Philly in 1998, so I didn't grow up here. I paid a lot of taxes.
Don't you wanna go to the city? Don't you wanna go to the city.
Thank you, thank you.
So do you want to tell us who you are in that music? I mean, that's a big question, right? We could take the whole hour just saying who you are, but just functionally, who are you in that production?
Functionally, I'm the arranger and the executive producer. I had a director, Kavana Frimpong from Green Street Media. My daughter, Bridget Ramsey, is singing lead and backup. Wavy Wilson, a co-producer, is singing backup on it, and starring the beautiful city of Philadelphia.
And who's playing the piano?
Well, I'm playing the piano,
Yeah,
too.
that
Yes,
part.
I forgot
That
about
part, don't forget that part. So I'm really proud and fortunate to know this person, Guthrie Ramsey, who I've known kind of in a real way since 2015, but I haven't told you this story about encountering race music as a young graduate student and having my eyes opened to the possibility of writing music as a career, which is what I had pitched as an applicant to that program, but did not have enough models of successful kind of investment and not losing oneself in the process of having selected this course of life. So I'm grateful to you for a number of reasons, some of which I think will be revealed today.
Race music is 20 years old this year,
Yes,
by the way.
it's amazing.
I hope I didn't date you just now.
Well, I
Sorta,
hope you
kinda.
dated yourself.
Yes, I did.
Not me, I've not aged, of course. But then we went on to, so we met at the UCLA Hammer event, where there was a whole panel of Black music scholars engaging with Neo Muyanga, the South African composer, and went on to co-edit Music of the African Diaspora together, the series that you'd been running for so long after shepherding it and through its transition after Sam Floyd, the founder of the series. And now being in a position to assist in bringing this beautiful book into the world, the book that is on the series that Tsitsi Jaji and I edit now with UC Press. So it's been actually, in the span of time, a relatively short relationship, but feels timeless in many respects.
Deep,
very, very deep.
Yes.
So I have some questions for Dr. Ramsey and some lightning round, quick fire kinds of questions that I'll mix in there too. And questions that I'm going to ask you to answer with just a very simple statement, no context, no comment, to which we might return during Q&A because there may be some provocative kinds of answers in response to those quick fire.
Can I be provocative? Do you want that?
Of course I do.
Okay.
I want nothing less. That's why we're here. But I'm using this as an opportunity to not just explore the work more, but to get to know you better, right? Because there's always more for us to know. And also to stir up some mess, as we're wont to do on occasion.
Yes, yes.
So by way of that, let me begin with this question. Do you regret or miss at all the time you spent over your career to revive, resuscitate, or reorient the field of musicology? And maybe you want to do a bit of setup on your relationship to the field, because not everyone will necessarily know how entrenched the field, the discipline is in particular ways of knowing and being.
Thank you for being here, Shana, and just delighted to be in conversation with you. I should say that I am an accidental musicologist. I was a person who didn't go straight to college after high school. I knew I wanted to be a musician, and I joined bands and went on the road and toured until I was about 21 or 22 years old. So by the time I matriculated and decided that, okay, I'm not going to live out a suitcase, and I think by then, no, I hadn't started fatherhood business yet. But I actually felt sorry for my music history professors. I looked at those people and I just said, oh my God, this is awful. Who would want to be a music historian? Who would want to talk about it when you could be out there doing music? And it wasn't until I graduated and became a public school teacher. You know, I was a music specialist in the Lawndale district of Chicago, which at that time was the poorest per capita neighborhood in the country.
Wow.
And I met so many beautiful kids who were talented and needed more, just needed to be cared for, who sang in gospel choirs on the weekend, and then they were going to come and do quote unquote formal study with me, you know, during the week. And I just felt that I was a bridge between the world that they knew outside of school and the one in school. I wanted to make them seem conjoined in the same way that I had grown up. And that went on for about 3 years. And an opportunity came up to get a master's in music education with this program that would allow you to study for free. And when you finished, you could get a $3,000 pay jump because you could change lanes, as they call it, in the public schools. Yeah, everything's very regimented.
Right.
And I said, okay, that sounds good to me. And in the meantime, you start pursuing graduate school, you have to start reading deeply. And there I met writers like Amiri Baraka, Portia Maltsby, Samuel Floyd, who I learned was working in Chicago at the Center for Black Music Research. And like the cultured bumpkin I was, I just knocked on his door one day, just found the address, and hey, hi, I've been reading your books. You know, can I talk to you? And I had no idea about the protocols, or you just didn't do that. And he was very welcoming and talked to me about it, gave me a little research project to do because I said, I'm interested in what you're doing. And I think I combined the project, knowing me, I combined the project of working with him with a grade or something, you know, so I could, get through it. And he observed me for about a year and said, I think you have what it takes to be a music historian, a musicologist, and a lot of programs at that moment in the late 80s were looking for, some color to come in, and so it was a kind of the perfect storm of events. The fellowships were flowing, trying to increase what they were calling multiculturalism at that point, and. I got into Michigan, and the rest is history. The only thing is, I didn't know ethnomusicology, from music theory, from composition. To me, it was all one field, but I quickly learned that it was segmented.
But are those productive absences in your knowledge? I mean, there's some, to my mind, right, being an interdisciplinary scholar, there's some advantage to walking in not knowing and therefore not caring about those divisions.
To be honest, I was there just to study Black stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and wherever it resided, I
Yeah.
was going to go.
That's right.
And so I became interdisciplinary because I was curious.
Yeah.
And not because I was trying to be fancy or up to date. It was just where was the information that I needed to get the project done. And consequently, what I had to do is the first essays in this book was me trying to understand the history of Black people writing about this music. And because, it was here and there and here and there, and I had to kind of pull it together myself, and I wrote to learn.
So that's what you were encountering as a student, right? The scattershot nature of writing about Black music, and recognizing, as he details in depth, that it was most often not Black people writing those stories, those histories. So as a student, and then you became a professor, right? So what difference did that make in then still deciding to commit to detailing these histories, to telling these stories, and calling the profession out, not so subtly, in your writing about what they weren't doing?
Well, the fascinating part about it, and it's hard for people to realize it today, that in the early 90s, when I was training and became a professor, I was one of the first people who could actually claim to have black music as their specialty. Up until that point, you couldn't say that that's
Right.
what you did in musicology. You had to study some Western art music, tradition, and then whatever you wanted to do on the side, or if they needed a multicultural course in the curriculum,
Right.
you could pull together a course or whatever. But I think I was one of the first ones to come in and say, okay, I'm going to, if I taught 4 courses, 3 of them were going to be about black people.
Right.
And this is what they wanted at the time, and because it was so scarce up until that point.
Right. Did the field want you writing about them in that way?
Well, there was a pressure, I think, to conform to this idea of being I'll just say it, a safe Negro. You had to be safe. You most certainly had to be grateful to be there. And you had to just keep the peace, In fact, one of the first things I had to do, or was, encouraged to do, was to join the Cultural Diversity Committee of the American Musicological Society, which began in 1995. And I remember there being a big debate about, well, we have to say it's cultural diversity, not actually talk about people.
Right.
You can't just say
Right.
out loud, we need to be less white
Right.
at that point.
Right.
That was just not a thing then.
Yeah.
It would, because people would get nervous,
Right.
and then the leadership would balk, and then the darkies would flow in, and then what are we going to do?
Right. Right.
Just all over the border.
Right. Well, you mentioned Birth of a Nation in this book, but that's still the haunting kind of projection, right?
Yeah.
Is that moment where the Negroes take over. So, quick fire question. Okay, and all of my quick fire questions are drawn from subjects of chapters in the book, so they're all related to things that you would hear more about, read more about in the book. Favorite song on the Love Jones soundtrack?
Okay. Well, I have to say that one that Darius performed. What was it?
A Blues for Nina?
A Blues for Nina.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because my friend Daryl Jones was playing bass in that scene.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
And it was set in Chicago.
Yes.
And I recognize the scene of the Whitaker, Jonathan Whitaker, tried to paint was a very ecumenical black musical culture of Chicago's South Side. I knew it well.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, there's some of everything in there. I love it. So, speaking of interdisciplinarity and all of the different knowledges that you brought to bear on your work in musicology, I wanted to ask you about how you came to kind of read deeply in and utilize the strategies, techniques, insights of Black feminist literary histories and criticism, as well as art history and criticism in your work. How did you come to utilize those ways of knowing, and what did it do for your work?
Okay, well, there are 2 people in the audience who are younger than me, but I actually looked to their work, and I would have to say meeting Farrah Jasmine Griffin in 1996 was a turning point for me because of the work she was doing she was writing the Billie Holiday book at the time, so we would meet weekly in our writing group up in Boston. Everybody was on fellowship and had time, and
Imagine.
Imagine that, yeah. It was one of those times. And we, just observing her work and also being ushered into Black feminist literary criticism, because Black feminist music criticism did not exist at that time. Okay, so that was my way of finding community of getting a theoretical framework that made sense, of ignoring the advice of some in the field who told me that feminist musicology was a trend. Why would you link your career up to that wagon? Because it's going nowhere.
And art history criticism?
And art history criticism, of course. And after meeting Madam Chair, Kelly Jones, and one of the first, met her in 2004 in the bookstore, Book Culture, which at that time was Labyrinth Books. We met at Farrah Griffin's book signing of Uptown Conversations.
bringing everybody together.
I know,
I love it.
she's like, she's hovering. Yeah, so we met, and shortly thereafter, one of her first, what should I say, Mac moves was, I'm curating an exhibition at Studio Museum in Harlem on abstraction. Can you write an essay on music? I'm like, well, put the moves on me, right?
Right. And you stepped up. I think I can.
I stepped up. Right, there you go. There you go. So the thing about trying to understand. Well, let's talk about that first assignment, which was to try to understand. Visual abstraction and musical abstraction in the same essay. So just quickly, what I had to do is to find what was representational and non-representational in the sonic world, in music. And since the piece I wrote was on free jazz, I decided to use the tonal system, isometric rhythm, meaning regular rhythms, the stuff Beautiful City was isometric rhythm. It just beats, organized and flowing through time evenly. And adventuresome timbres and things like that, or qualities of sound. So that was the musical setup. And then, of course, in the visual, I was being introduced to artists like Jack Whitten, whose piece is on the cover, Ed Clark, William T., Sam Gilliam, and so on. I think Betty Sarr might have been in there, maybe. So I had to find allegories in music after reading, Kelly's brilliant essay that broke down the visual abstraction in terms of its, I would call it the mechanics of delivery in music. I guess it was the technique and, mass, volume, line, shape, color, and that. So I had to find this. And along the way, I learned that there were kind of cultural types or characters in both the visual and musical world. In music, in visual, you had collectors and dealers and curators and artists and and all that. In music, you had collectors and dealers. I don't know what would be a dealer, but maybe an agent, musical agent. Someone who actually gets you where you need to go. A&R agents. Musicians and venues and all that. So it was an education that I just kept going with because I found it so fascinating.
Yeah.
Along with the person who was actually giving me the.
That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, right.
Don't forget that part. Well, I think that kind of curiosity and the willingness to kind of extend and expand your kind of thought process is very much reflective in the work, in your performance work, your compositions, et cetera. So do you want to play another piece? Because the three that I know you have set up for tonight are all different. And throughout this project, throughout your repertoire, your catalog, you have a very clear critique of genre, right? Oh, yeah. That constantly breaking what he calls the social contract of genre, that we buy into these forms that have been constructed by industry brokers, et cetera. So do you want to play us something else? Because it will sound very different than this, but equally as...
Sure.
rich.
Sure. So that first piece, Beautiful City, is of course a spiritual that we put in kind of contemporary form. It's kind of, what would that be? Jazz, fusion-y, R&B, soul, gospel kind of vibe. And at the moment that I was arranging that, I was enamored with Jacob Collier and those tight harmonies. And then I had two singers in the studio who blended well and whose vibratos would match. And so with this piece, which is titled after the song, I commissioned a rapper, a Philadelphia-based rapper, chemist, to co-write a song with me. And he happened to be an artist who had been reading my work since he was a teenager. And he's a very intellectual cat who pursued rap music through his engagement with what he was reading about Black music, and I was one of the authors.
Okay.
And we somehow met at a party, and I heard him perform.
At Ferris party?
No, yeah, right, of course. Right? She wasn't at this one.
Oh, okay.
But maybe she was, actually. I think she happens to be at this party, as a matter of fact. Wow.
Common denominator is all I'm saying.
Yes. And so what I did is I gave him some materials to read from the book. And I said, I'm not going to tell you what to write. I just want you to respond to the book in the way that you do. And I knew that when we had started planning it, Beyonce and Drake had just dropped some dance tracks, you know. So house music was back last summer.
Yeah, not new, back.
It was back, right.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to it, everybody's all excited. I'm like, yo, I remember this. I was
Right.
I was housing when it started, you know?
Right.
And so I just say, okay, let's do some house and mix it with rap. And then, of course, I try to make everything sound like Herbie Hancock stepped into the studio, you know.
Of course.
Right. So this is a little lyric video we made of the song Who Hears?
Okay.
It's only right that I show you myself. And the dance gonna tell you about the rain. You know the feet gonna kick up all the dirt. And the dirt gonna tell you about the pain. And the sound only permeates the world. Cause we rode on so many of its waves. From a land where they can barely handle one. Of the 12 bars in the blues from which I came. To read black in the stories of my blood. And the war for my kind of have a say. On the plane where most in the rooms told our stories through the white gaze. So who here's the art of the East? Who translate the sound on the page? To break through with the truth they avoided for so long is to bring the world a new day. Why the songs of the time in your heart, on your mind? Who hears? I can take you to heights, change your life, show you right. Who hears? Move with the moments of time. Give organized sound and face. Know why the groove had arrived. Know why we dance in this place. This ain't inferior to none. A fat truce and try to escape. I come from the spiritual song. And all that jazz made us away. They say we ain't arted, we ain't great. Now look at what I forced academia to say. My unapologetic attitude couldn't be erased. Contributed to the way that musicology was shaped. Just felt in the streets and in the Ivy Leagues. You can't deny the facts, it makes you feel the way. The music touches soul, it's no time to waste. So get up and move inside this new day. Why the songs of the time in your heart, on your mind? Who hears? I could take you to heights, change your life, show you right. Who hears? You hear?
Thank you. David Hackley, producer, Wavy Wilson, mix and master, Bridget Ramsey, and Wavy Wilson on background, me on piano, and my college roommate on trumpet.
Hey.
Yeah, I always like to do the family thing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of family, I wanted to ask you to say some more, again, the anniversary of race music, where you begin by telling stories of your family, of your life, as entrance to your first full-length monograph, right? This is your debut text as a faculty person in this industry, and you're talking about your family from the first page of that book. And I wanted to ask you to say some more about what you could not have answered without those stories, without writing yourself in that way, and what did it take for you to lead with that kind of vulnerability? Because this is before autoethnography was the rage in academic writing, right? So I'm curious about how and why, what did it help you to do? And then also more specifically, I prepared you for this question to speak specifically about how your mother receives your work, because I know you have a very intimate relationship with her, and she reads your work. So I'm curious about that.
Okay, wonderful questions. I think that I took the turn to put memoir into my work at that time because when I published the article, Who Hears Here, before race music came out, there was grumblings and rumblings. Nobody said it to my face, but the word was I was claiming that my argument was that black people could write about black music better than anybody else and should be the only ones writing about it. That's the opposite of what I was saying.
Right.
I was just saying that just because we're in the room, at the seminar table, at the conferences being published, it doesn't mean that we're the only ones that need to be doing it. It's just that we need to be included in the number. Period, the end. And also, I thought that because, as we talk about all the time, because black music has always symbolized the power struggles in broader social arrangements in the society, you have to come at it with a specific kind of theoretical eye, critical eye, and you have to really you have to understand how your own subjectivity is interacting with the sheer force of this music.
Right.
It can only enhance everybody's work.
Right.
You have to come to terms with it. Whether you choose to write about it is one thing, but it's something you should come to terms with. And because people thought it was just me saying, I'm the one that needs to do it. No, actually, I'm bringing a whole lot of people with me. I'm bringing the history of migration. Again, race music is Who Set You Flowing's little brother in that way, you know what I mean? Because it was about how these mass movements and cultural patterns created certain kind of sonic organizations and the values attached to them.
Right.
So I just had to bring all of my 100-year-old great aunt and all of the people who, fled out of Alabama and Georgia and went to Chicago, my mother's family that came up, very blues-based Southern family that moved up later in the 1950s. I wanted to show that entanglement because most of the music I studied from the 1920s to the 1960s was born out of those cultural patterns. And so I just trust, I can talk like this now. If some white scholar had discovered my family and written about them, it would have been perfectly fine. Okay? But I said, well, let me beat you to the punch.
Right.
Let me talk about Auntie Inez and ask her what she thought about the situation. and I learned so much.
Yeah.
It was partially about me trying to understand why when I sit down at the piano, why when I sit down with recordings, why when I sit down and have to write as a scholar, that I believe I am channeling all of the experiences of growing up being raised by migrants.
So your mother specifically?
Well, Mom was a valedictorian of her high school in Valdosta, Georgia. She has the diploma to prove it, stamped colored on it, just in case you forgot. Okay. And she is someone, particularly after she started reading all of the art history and music history that was coming her way in the mail, and she reads everybody, all of our friends. She reads all of Elizabeth Alexander, all, Barrett Griffin, who else? Just a list of people that we know who know her. We make sure she gets their books. And especially when she started reading art history, her reaction was, this is what they didn't want me to know. This is why we got the secondary elementary school books with torn pages out. When the new books came out for the white district, they would get the leftover books. This is why our teachers spent their own money to get us supplies. And she reads every page, every footnote, and Googles every artist and every musician because she said, this is her resistance. This is how I can do it in my 90s.
Yeah.
And recover the dream she had when she was graduated as a valedictorian with a scholarship to Spelman, but saw no path forward, so she got married and started having babies. And she asked the most amazing questions. Recently, she asked me, "Oh, so Jack Whitten is painting music, huh?" I'm like, well, damn, Mom, guess he is.
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to say, just as a follow-up, right? Having all of these incredibly deep and rich conversations with you for having taken that time to study, right? And to invest in it as an ongoing, lifelong process.
Oh,
right?
indeed, indeed. And just the atmosphere they raised us in. We were educated by migrants. These people had just gotten up. So in the 60s, when I was in elementary school, they were trying to create something for us because they were the civil rights, generation.
Right.
They were going to flip it for us. They were going to make sure we got opportunities. But they didn't want us to forget either.
That's right.
They taught, one of the cheers from junior high was a 12-bar blues. Can you imagine a whole auditorium of 12 and 13-year-olds? Don't say nothing bad about the spirit. Oh, no, don't say nothing bad about the spirit. Love is so. Don't say nothing bad about the spirit. Oh, no, don't say nothing bad about the spirit. We all right. So something. Oh, no, that's a 12-bar blues. I'm like, okay.
Right. The games black girls play, right? All the double dutch, all of those things that are returning those stories, those traditions to us. So in thinking about how your music and your writing as collected here kind of traverses all of these different boundaries and expectations, I wanted to put you alongside someone that you write about in here, Robert Glasper, and to ask you as a lightning question, your favorite featured artist in his Black Radio series.
I love Esperanza and Q-Tip.
Yeah.
That's a jam.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I love the way the keyboards are set up. I love that she's doing this very ephemeral, high, kind of sweeping, melismatic thing. And then he comes in with the hook. The hook is spoken, which I think is just brilliant. The contrast is amazing. So I really like that.
Yeah, those dualities he sets up are tremendous. Layla covering Nirvana, right?
Yeah.
Like just amazing.
Yeah.
So this is what you retired for, right?
Yes.
When you told me, what was it, 2-3 years ago, that you were going to retire to play. And when you said play, I took that in its most capacious sense, right?
Yes.
I was so happy. So I was on the other end of the phone in California, like, yes, someone is going to model for me how to get out.
Yes. Get out.
And do what they need to do, right? To fulfill themselves, to sustain themselves. I was so happy for you. And these are the kinds of collaborations that now, in the wake of walking away from your official capacity duties or your official duties at the university, what it's allowed you to do. So can you say some more about collaboration and what now has been opened up for you?
Oh, the thing that is most different for me now, because I've always, even when I was in graduate school and hiding the fact that I kept a little church job just to keep the fingers going and to keep food on the table, because I had 3 kids in grad school. The thing that's most different now is that I have time to cultivate the artistic relationships that make the best collaborations. I know that now it seems that people who are doing this work now, because it's not so much of a big deal as it was back when I started. It seems to be baked in the cake, and I'd like to think that in musicology, the work I did early on and insisted on doing was a part of breaking it up for younger people to be able to do this stuff.
Sure.
I just could never figure out how to make it work while I was full-time professoring. There was something about maybe how much focus I put on teaching. It could have been that. It could have been that, never thought about it this way, but because active music making and being a scholar were set up as antithetical in my earliest years, that's what I picked up on, that as the first Black PhD at the University of Michigan in musicology, they were trying to size me up to see if I still had all of the emotional momentum that it takes to believe that you're a musician. And then to convince yourself that rather than being in the practice room, you're going to be in the library for 8 hours a day. So maybe there was a certain suspicion that I was picking up on and some direct comments and all of that. So it was always a thing that I felt like I was trying to work out. Right. And now I don't have to work it out anymore. Yeah. I just can, just meet people for coffee and stay up late and work on things.
Yeah, you can just do.
Just do, yes.
Yeah. One more question and then we'll open it up for questions. Where haven't we gone yet in Black music study?
I think I would have a better pulse on that if I were still in the game and full time. And this is what I mean in the game. To actually really answer that, you have to be recruiting graduate students. Seeing what they're interested in, running courses that you think they need. You have to be going to conferences to see what abstracts were accepted, to see what are the hot topics, to see who are the rising young scholars. You have to be reading manuscripts and adjudicating and refereeing articles to see who's on the cutting edge, what are people talking about in the graduate seminars, okay? I skip all of that. And if
Hence my to-do list.
yes, I got, I just say, hey, once I get in book form, then I can deal with it. Until then, hey, y'all got that. So I don't know if I can really comment in that way, because I think you actually need that full view about where things are going. They tell me where it's going.
Well, is there something you're desirous of? And it can be performative too. Let's not confine it to kind of the writing, scholarly world. Is there something in the music that you're listening for?
Well, I should say that I'm always most interested these days in the music I'm planning and putting out, to tell you the truth. And to actually have the courage to say that is a lot for me.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you get when you're have all of these musical, desires, and you have to read graduate exams and grade the German test and all of that, is that you kind of feel like, oh, wow, I'm not really in it. Mm-hmm. So the stuff I'm working on is really of perpetual interest to me. Yeah. I should say that. But what to watch? I saw a concert recently at Town Hall where this great musician, Damian Sneed, arranged the compositions of who I think is one of the greatest American musicians, Twinkie Clark, one of the Clark sisters. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, oh man, to be able to honor someone that you respect, whose music you respect, and to have them sit in the audience, and you arrange this, you have a chamber orchestra, you got a band, you have backup singers, you have a conductor's chair with an electric piano, facing the musicians with it's like, oh my God, I saw my dream.
Okay, so who's your person?
Who's my person?
You're playing, and they're in the audience. Who's that person?
Oh boy. Okay, Twinkie's gone. She got hers. You know what? It would have to be someone like Herbie Hancock, who's a fellow Chicagoan and whose kind of capacious, ecumenical musical tastes actually really reflect mine. And I think I modeled them after him.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm happy to do it. Too happy. Who has a question or a comment for us?
Shana, you were so good. These questions were so good as someone who has followed you on this journey, Guthrie. The questions just really got to the core. So at this stage, do you still want to write?
Oh yeah, I have 3 books underway.
Yep.
One is Soundproof, Black Music, Magic, and Racial Intimacies. It's my history of African American music from the enslaved period to the present, which talks about it along 2 lines. One, what it meant to the Black community, and also as the site of the most intense interracial interaction throughout the histories. It's not targeted to scholars. And I have a couple other things, So I do want to write. I want to write about Twinkie Clark. I want to write about Terry Lynn Carrington. Just being able to meet and talk to these women. I think their music is so essential. And I have the time to think about them in the right way. And here's the thing. I'm very clear about who my audience is and isn't these days. So that's a big thing for a writer, as you know, is to be able to think about projects in terms of who they're for, rather than what you want to say solely. It's about who they're for. Who are you trying to reach? Yeah, so I do have a desire to write. It's just that I know how to do this. I mean, this is what I do naturally now. And the music thing is where I have the all of the generative insecurities and the curiosities and the thing where you're like, can I do this? Can I do this? I'm nervous, and all of that kind of thing that actually makes you feel like you're 18.
Yeah. And can be generated into really beautiful things, right? One of the only things I recall from my voice coach when I was doing such things was, when you're not nervous to perform anymore, you should hang it up, right? Because it means you don't care anymore, right? So all of that anxiety, the nerves before going on stage or stepping into the studio, whatever, are super generative. Like they're kineticism to be transferred, right?
Yes. And it's kind of gets into the spirit of that, I believe, gets into the music, and it's what people receive in it. I'm taking producing lessons right now. So this is the first time I've been the student in 35 years. I'm so excited. I'm learning so many things. I'm learning software and getting into the weeds and just feeling young, and it's a beautiful thing. In fact, that piece, what are you doing, is I produced that entire thing.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for a really fantastic conversation. And I guess my question goes back to the first video, because I know, Guthrie, in the beginning you talk about a lot in the book about the time in which you're writing and what you're listening to, but you also talk about the place, right? And that first video is very much about Philadelphia. And I was curious the impact of Philadelphia on your work, but also how the sounds of Philadelphia impact your work, right? And how the various places that you've been have impacted the way in which you both write and produce music.
I love Philadelphia. I was so happy when I got that job. I was living in Boston and deciding that it really wasn't, I couldn't set horses with it, as the old folks used to say. And I literally, and this is no lie, I listened to Martha Reeves and the Vandellas song Dancing in the Street. And if she didn't call that city out in that song, I did not apply. And she didn't call Boston out. I guess they weren't dancing in the street in Boston in '63. They were doing something else. Were they allowed on the street? I don't know. But I was so happy when that opportunity came, not because it was Penn and not because I had designs on the certain kind of school I wanted to work at. I just really didn't. It's just I wanted to be where I could feel free, where I could listen to black radio, where I could sit in the dive bars, where I could run the streets and listen to music, which is exactly what I did. And when I moved to Philadelphia, I recognized something that reminded me of my hometown of Chicago. And that is, there is, as Farrah points out, and Read Until You Understand, there is a deep historical consciousness among, let's call it the lay people, about their culture. It's in the air. If you go to a dive bar and there's a jazz band playing, it's a highly sophisticated listening audience that understands what they're listening to. They're musicians, and I love that they could hear the bluesiness-based stuff that I was doing and mixing it in with that Philadelphia culture. So who hears here is always about where one is doing the writing, doing the listening, and doing the performing, because it changes. It really matters where you are. I remember growing up with these cultures that we talk about, the migration cultures from the eastern seaboard up, and then the middle of the culture up, and then out to LA. We could all be listening to the same mass-mediated text, but each city has a different dance they were doing to it. And then if you had cousins from out of town, like, what are y'all doing to that? It was always about that kind of interaction. So I'm always aware. When I moved to Bed-Stuy, I'm very aware of the West Indian culture, very strong. Back in the day before the gentrifiers came in, you don't hear music all night Friday night anymore. You could really hear the diaspora walking down the street, rattling the car windows. Mm-hmm.
Oh, am I on? Okay, great. This has been a lovely and stimulating and highly existential conversation for me, at least. I take on so much of your work, Guy, and your person, your as artist, as in some ways everything, to quote or invoke that important text and figure. I have a million questions. I'll try to narrow it down to one, because in some ways I think quite often about sort of just walking away from this thing and becoming a DJ or something, and so music is just so important at so many different registers that there's far more people who are qualified to talk about it. I'm glad that's why I'm here. So I want to just ask, lift up sort of one thread that's kind of, I think, lift up one of the threads in terms that's in your sort of title of your album, spirituality, Twinkie Clark. You talk about your own sort of formation in churches and planning for churches. I can't help but to think about, and this raises some other sort of some metaphilosophical questions that we can't get into, but how do you see religion sort of flowing in and out and around sort of this, sort of what you do, how you think, how you play? I have my own sort of way in trying to think about that, but I'm more really interested in knowing how because you embody in a way. I mean, I used to be a musician in a way too, and so, but I constantly more and more thinking about sort of that integration in my scholarly sort of self, because in some ways, anyway, yeah. How are you sort of just? How do you position, reflect, sort of open yourself up to sort of the kind of powers of sort of other worlds and realms that music so much sort of represent and sort of embody and sort of takes us up into and out from, and we can throw all the prepositions. We got some poets in here, I'm sure. So how are you sort of, what do you do with that, the religion? Because so much of, Black music has so much to do with sort of, these things. And so historically and, in other kinds of ways and places and so forth. So thank you.
One of the things thank you for the question. One of the things I sense in your, in the question is about the here of being in the academy and religion and spirituality. I'll never forget taking an ethnomusicology course in graduate school, and it was a course on epics. We were studying epics around the world and the music attached to them. And I was the only one, I think, that chose, of course, I had transcribed Twinkie Clark's, one of her vocalises, and it was amazing to me that around the table that we had explored so many religions from around the world and so many epics. It wasn't until we started talking about Black Christianity that everybody had to preface their comments by saying, well, I'm not part of that, or I'm not really into Jesus, and, I mean, it was the strangest thing. It was so telling to me that, there's something about studying that on these campuses that is threatening, and it comes from everywhere. I mean, I see it in a lot of the black cultural critics that we studied from the 1960s, the black arts movement, where they couldn't, I mean, didn't want anything to do with Jesus, but you can't dismiss the music that actually formed so much of what constituted black popular culture of the 20th century and beyond. So what I do to circumvent that tension is rely on music. And one of the things as a musician that I believe in and do and participate in is that I'm channeling. There's something coming over me. There's something coming through me. And all I have to do is sit there and if I'm composing, all I have to do is sit there and wait for it. And it will come, the right chord. I'll know when it hits. I'll know it when in the first rehearsal with the singer. By the way, that last singer was Jakia Limitless is her name, and a Philadelphia-based singer. Beautiful big voice, okay? And it's through these collaborative connections that you could check to say, oh, there's this spiritual thing going on. Mm-hmm. And I frankly don't ascribe it all to Jesus. That there's a what's the word, a German, quarter word for it, the Geist, the Zeitgeist, that we're constantly working through. And so I'm always fascinated when people make a point to say, well, statements like, well, Luther Vandross wasn't raised in the church, so we can't count that as an influence. Well, but the church was just spilling all over everything, you know. You didn't have to go to church. It's going to hit you upside the head, in every Aretha Franklin riff you hear. And so I don't, it's less to me about a religious expression and more about a spirituality, a system of knowing that creates social bonds where they didn't otherwise exist.
I remember being here for your book chat when you